Okay, it's almost 10:03 and we are expecting a few more participants. So hopefully they will have already been through Zoom technology and will know about Zoom. In fact, we'd like to start off with that kind of webinar 101. We are recording this session, and so you are muted. Of course, we want to be able to answer your questions. If you see down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, the Q&A feature is where you can ask those questions. At the very end of the session, of course, we will take a look at all your questions, try to answer them for you as well. There is also a chat feature. Unfortunately, any questions that you ask using the chat feature will not be in the recorded session. And for those individuals that will be watching this in the future, we want to give them as many of the questions that you have and answers to as many of the questions as you have. So thank you for using the Q&A, and again, we'll answer those at the end of our time together. Well, we want to thank you. My name is Claudio Diaz, and I am with the Human Resources team at Briggs & Veselka. And if you are currently a BMV client, we really want to thank you for the trust you have extended our firm to help you run your business successfully. And obviously, if you're not a client of ours, we welcome you as well, and we hope you'll let us prove that we do exactly that. I have been with the firm for a short 3 months, but have been in the accounting industry for 15 years. And my role really has been to support the professionals that support our clients, which are internal clients. Obviously, the FFCRA has impacted us as well. So hopefully you'll see me as a trusted advisor that can help you through the process. However, I'm not alone. We also have our counsel, Tao Grip, who's on the line. Tao, you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. This is Tao Grip. I'm with Briggs & Veselka's litigation support practice. I also oversee the firm's privacy and compliance. And I thank you all for joining our webinar. I hope this is helpful. And again, as Claudio mentioned, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function and send us any questions after the webinar if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Tao. And Tao will be coming in and out of the presentation with any additional points potentially that I may not cover and any other additional ideas. So we know as a team of two that there's so many details to the FFCRA that we want to make sure that we give you those answers as expeditiously as possible so that you can get back to operating your business. So we are here today to discuss the paid leave provisions of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, easy for me to say, the FFCRA. And the two acts that are under the FFCRA are the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, which is the EPSLA, and the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act, or the EFMLEA. Through the process, we'll also be comparing the latter to that Family and Medical Leave Act that we've all been living for many years now. So that's a lot of alphabet soup. And since I didn't get breakfast in, I'm going to stay away from the alphabet soup. And instead, I'll be calling the FFCRA provisions paid sick leave and expanded family leave so that you're aware of what I'm talking about. Both are in force and have been in force from April 1st through December 31st of this year. It is not retroactive, so if someone wanted to avail of the leave benefits for some sick time before April 1st, they can't. It's only from April 1st through December 31st. All right, so before we dive into the details of the acts and the benefits, let's take a look at eligibility. And specifically, let's see, who is covered. So if you are an employer with fewer than 500 employees, you are covered under the FFCRA. And employees is italicized on this slide because what does employee constitute? Well, one thing it does not constitute is independent contractors. So we do not have independent contractors covered under the FFCRA. But outside of that, it really does include all your employees from, from full-time, part-time, and temporary employees to employees that are on leave, and they have to be employed within the United States at the time the employee wants to take the leave. A couple of points about some of these details. When you take a look at temp employees, those can be counted for your organization, whether they are on your payroll or the temp agency's payroll. And remember that your employee count can fluctuate. Today, you may be at 530 employees. That, in essence, exempts you, right? But if through actions like a RIF or a layoff, you dip below 500, the remaining employees can then avail of these benefits. And let's say that, in fact, your head count isn't that high, or through your actions, it gets really low, like maybe under 50 essential employees to kind of run your business. What does that curtail? So the small business exemption applies to both the paid sick leave as well as the expanded leave. And we know that if you have less than 50 employees, you are under exception. And we have to make sure that all of the child care reasons for the request for leave are COVID related, so that if it's a closure or unavailability. And then you or anyone in your organization who is an authorized officer determines that the leave would jeopardize the viability of the small business. We put that in quotes because we want to cover what jeopardize the viability means and how you can avail of that. So in essence, we try to keep things simple here at B&V. When you're jeopardizing the viability of your business, it's really that expenses are more than the revenues that are coming in. So if you were to provide this paid sick leave or the expanded family leave, it would in essence result in your small business's expenses and financial obligations exceeding the available business revenues. And therefore, your small business would eventually cease operating at that capacity if that were to happen. So that's one example of what jeopardized viability means. In addition to that, if by chance the absence of the employee or the employees that are requesting paid sick leave or the expanded family leave would impose a substantial risk to the financial health or the operational effectiveness of your small business, because their specialized skills, knowledge of the business, or responsibilities they have are needed in order for you to operate. And then lastly, if there aren't sufficient workers available, able, willing, and qualified to replace the individuals that are on paid sick leave or expanded family and medical leave, and the labor that they would give you would be needed for your small business to operate, then you also could make an exemption upon jeopardized viability. So we know that this is something that potentially several of you, depending on your organization size, could avail of. Tao, any other points that you might want to cover on this? Or
I would just want to mention that employers should take into consideration whether they have any jointly shared employees, and to count those employees when they're trying to calculate the number of employees that they have and fall under this criteria. Another point is that the Department of Labor has also issued guidance that employers, in order to take the small business exemption, that they must document that a determination has been made pursuant to the criteria that Claudio has gone through, but they don't need to send that documentation into the DOL. But they do need to retain the records in their files for 4 years.
Yeah, 4 years, and we are not kidding. We did say 4 years. And we'll talk about that later as well for the individuals that are asking for the paid sick leave, because we have to, use the same amount of record retention time for them as well. Thank you, Tal, for adding those key points. Okay, so now that we've covered the eligibility component, let's talk a little bit about the key differences. We're going to go through 2 rounds of key differences. We want to talk through the FFCRA and at a pretty high level. And then we're going to dive down to the Paid Sick Leave Act as well as the Expanded Family Leave Act and some of the key issues that you may want to be aware of that would take potentially hours to comb through if you haven't already read some of their documents. A lot of everything we're talking about is based really on 6 reasons for leave, and those reasons can be divided into 2 areas. The areas are personal leave. In other words, this is impacting you personally, or it's impacting another person that you are with, and we'll get into the details here in a minute. So really, if you look at these 6 reasons for leave, the critical reason why we break it down into these 2 components or these 2 headings is the amount of money that then you have to pay them. So that's very important to know. So let's go through those 6 reasons for leave. On the personal side, if you are subject to COVID quarantine, whether that you're symptomatic or confirmed COVID case, or your healthcare provider has told you to self-quarantine for obvious reasons, or you are experiencing COVID symptoms and are seeking medical diagnosis, those 3 reasons are personal reasons, and they are affecting you. Note that I put an asterisk there just to pause for a minute and make sure that you are aware of the word "and." So experiencing symptoms alone does not constitute reason enough for the leave request from your employee. They must also be seeking medical diagnosis. So if someone calls you and says, I'm feeling a little under the weather, maybe just a tad bit feverish, etc., but they are not seeking medical diagnosis, that is not sufficient reason for the leave. They have to do both. Okay, well, let's flip to the other side. If you are caring for an individual who is subjected to COVID quarantine, or you are caring for a child, your child, whose school or childcare is closed or not available due to COVID, or you're experiencing substantially similar experiences, those are reasons why someone can take the leave. On number 4, we want to talk a little bit about the word individual, italicized there. That means an employee's immediate family member, or it could be a person who regularly resides in the employee's home, or a similar person with whom the employee has a relationship that creates kind of the expectation that the employee would care for that person. So you want to make sure and comb through those criteria of what an individual, caring for an individual, to make it eligible. Notice reason 5 has 2 asterisks because that's very important. This is the only reason why you would give leave under the Expanded Medical Leave Act, okay? The only reason why we would give expanded medical leave is because someone is taking care of their child whose school or child care is closed or unavailable for COVID reasons. Now, before we separate these 2 provisions and discuss the details behind paid sick leave and expanded leave, we want to make one critical point, and it has to do with money. That usually wakes people up, right? For reasons 1 through 3, the employee will get full pay within certain limits, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. However, for items 4 through 6, they will only get 2/3 of the pay that they normally get, again, with certain caps. That's pretty important information for us to be aware of as business owners and as consultants to businesses. Especially if they're going to take the expanded family leave, which spans a full 10 weeks. Do the math. 1/3 of your pay reduced for 10 weeks might not be the best option for your employees or associates. And remember, reason 5, the child care reason, we'll call it for the rest of the seminar or the webinar, is the only way they can benefit from the expanded family leave. All right, but we're getting ahead of ourselves and talking about the family leave. Let's break these 2 out and discuss some of the key details, and we'll start with the paid sick leave. So some key issues to be considering on paid sick leave is that the maximum benefit they can take is 80 hours within 2 weeks. Part-time associates get a prorated portion of the 80 hours, And the simple, somewhat simple way of doing that is you just simply take their average amount of work that they've had for the past 6 months per week, and then multiply it times 2 for 2 weeks. And that will be the 2-week average that you would give to your part-time associates. Now, the eligibility that we'll talk about in just a minute really also is differentiated between paid sick leave and expanded family leave. So we'll cover that in just a minute. Want to talk that money issue though before we jump into the eligibility. So the maximum payout that you can have is that you are needing to give them is $511 per day, or $5,110 aggregate for the 2 weeks. Do the simple math, 10 business days, right? For reasons 1 through 3. If by chance they are seeking leave under the FFCRA and their reasons are 4 through 6 that we just covered, you notice that the maximum payout is much less. It's $200 a day or $2,000 aggregate for the 2 weeks. So that's really important for your employees to know. And the eligibility is really all associates, including part-time, just like we talked about. However, we want to make sure that you know that for the paid sick leave, there is no 30-day period. We'll talk in a minute about expanded leave, which has a 30-day eligibility. That they will have to have been with you for at least 30 days. With the paid sick leave, that's not the case. Let's take a look at the language that's being used in these acts. So the words unable to work or telework. So if you think about it, if they are unable to work or telework, it's because they have on-site responsibilities. So we want to make sure that you understand that really telework, that the employee is considered to be able to telework if his or her employer, you have the work for them, and you permit the employee to work from their location, and there are no extenuating circumstances like we talked about, the COVID-19 symptoms, and they're seeking medical attention, etc., that prevent the employee from performing that work. So you can telework if you as an employer are permitting them. But if by chance they have on-site responsibilities, that could be as simple, for instance, as a receptionist, and you don't have the technology to allow that receptionist to manage calls from home. Or it could be in a manufacturing environment or a warehousing environment where, doing something with inventory requires physically being in the warehouse. That is a little different. Of course, they're not able to telework. And then lastly, shelter in place, the language that now we're so used to hearing in the media. It potentially may be true that if they're being asked to stay at home and shelter in place by their local municipality, and they are still unable to work for COVID reasons, that they could potentially, this quarantine could potentially offer them the paid sick leave benefit.
And one comment is that it's been asked whether stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders are the same as quarantine or isolation orders. And for FFCRA purposes, they are the same.
That's a great clarification. Thank you, Tal. We know that there are other issues, so we want to move forward with some other issues as well. So if by chance you offer paid time off to your employees, they are the ones that should decide whether to use that first. Why would they want to do that? Well, if you take a look at the pay, and that associate either makes more than $511 or is simply just doing the sick leave benefit because of childcare reasons, and $200 might not cover them, they're better off, just doing the math, if they take their PTO first, right? However, we as employers cannot mandate or require that. They are the ones that must decide that. We highly recommend that you simply just make them aware of the maximum limits and let them decide. Do not even imply, especially in written format, you should take your PTO first. That's a decision that they have to make. There is also some language around intermittent leave. And this is completely allowed, but only with your approval. So there has to be very good two-way communication going on. And you can take that intermittent leave, or they, the employee, can take that intermittent leave in increments. It doesn't have to be used all. So we just want to make sure, though, that you as an employer and the employee understand that it's your approval that's needed for intermittent leave. We know you have a lot of parents that have partners at home who are helping with all of the child care reasons. So both parents can't avail of the paid sick leave benefit at the same time, or if you want to think about it as a shift, only one parent is really, in the eyes of the Department of Labor, needed to stay home with the child. So I have 4 children, so obviously the DOL doesn't understand my situation, but let's not get into personal issues. The point is that they frown upon that if by chance they do an audit later, if both parents, especially for what they deem as appropriate for one parent to stay home, not multiple parents needing to stay home. And the last point on the paid sick leave before we get into the Expanded Medical Leave Act is that obviously if you don't have the work, there is no leave available. So if by chance they've been laid off or on furlough, or you decide that you have to close your business operations outside of essential employees like security guards or things like that, there is no leave available if there is no work for the employee. That's really the bottom line. Tao, any other key points that you want to throw in before maybe we jump to expanded leave?
Yes. You mentioned that intermittent leave is allowed based on employer approval, and it may be taken in increments when you're teleworking. There's a unique rule, though, if you're still working at your usual work site, and that intermittent leave may be taken only in full day increments, and it cannot be taken intermittently if the leave is being taken because you're subject to a local quarantine or isolation order, you've been advised by a health provider to self-quarantine, you're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, seeking the medical diagnosis, you're caring for an individual who's either subject to the quarantine or isolation order, or that last reason, which was you're experiencing other substantially similar conditions. So once you begin taking paid sick leave for one or more of these qualifying reasons, you must continue to take it until you've either used the full amount of your paid sick leave or you no longer have a qualifying reason for taking the paid sick leave. So that was just a clarification I wanted to add for that.
That's great. So I heard 2 things, and please clarify if I heard them incorrectly. Obviously, being on-site intermittent leave is not applicable. And second piece is once those 2 weeks, once you start taking the paid sick leave and the 2 weeks have come and gone, I can't go back into the well afterwards.
Yes.
Right. No, great clarifications. All right. So those are some of the key issues that are there with paid sick leave. So let's jump to the key differences from the FMLA to the expanded medical leave. And for those of you that, obviously, if you're an owner, you know about FMLA. It's for serious health conditions that the associate or others in their care are experiencing. So we just want to make sure that you understand what we mean by FMLA since we've defined the other 2. So we're going to break these down into different components. So the first thing is the eligibility. The employee's eligibility for FMLA is they have to have worked with you for 1 year and 1,250 hours. To get sick leave under the family medical leave, expanded family medical leave, it's 30 days, not 1 year. And there are absolutely no minimum hours. A very weird situation, but let's say, for instance, you hired someone 33 days ago. And for whatever reason, they showed up the first day, but didn't necessarily show up the rest of the time, for whatever situation might be there. If that individual has been there 30 days and is still an active employee according to your HRIS, they can avail of expanded leave. So that's the employee eligibility. The employer eligibility for FMLA is you must have more than 50 employees or 50 plus employees. So the cutoff is 50. With the Expanded Medical Leave Act, as we talked about, it has to be under 500 employees. Well, how much leave time can you give them? 12 weeks is still the maximum for both acts. So we want to make sure you understand that if by chance someone had a maternity leave in the last 12 months and used a portion or all of their FMLA rights and privileges, they would not then be able to use the Expanded Medical Leave Act because they've exhausted the 12 weeks within the past 12 months. If they only decided to use 9 weeks for some reason, of course, do the simple math, it's 3 weeks that are left. So each one of the two cases for the rest of the year till December 31st include each other. So that if I take some expanded leave right now, and then later I'm on a maternity leave, I will be limited to only the remaining time that I didn't take of the 12-week maximum. And given that I'm on maternity leave, it's important that I have my insurance. So under both acts, you do have insurance continuation, however, not pay continuation. Okay, so we know that the Family Medical Leave Act is without pay. And that's a pretty important factor for many of your employees, obviously. For the expanded leave, it can be up to 10 weeks. And notice it says up to 10 weeks, weeks 3 through 12, because the first 2 weeks are not paid. However, they can use the paid sick leave benefits for those first 2 weeks and then use the benefits from the expanded leave for the remaining 10 weeks to really make up the 12 weeks. And remember that their pay is going to be different depending on whether it's paid sick leave or expanded leave. For paid sick leave, we had full pay up to 510, but here for the expanded leave, they are only going to get 2/3 of their pay with a cap of $200 per day and 10,000 aggregate. So it's important that everybody communicate that as much as you can to your employees in a general information session so that they're aware that if by chance they are going to avail of the expanded leave, that their pay is going to be capped at those rates. And the last one is very important to reiterate that for FMLA, it could be a parental issue, it could be a medical issue, it could be your medical issue, it could be others' medical issue. So there's a lot more reasons under the FMLA for the expanded leave. It's only to take care of your own child who's under 18 and there is a COVID closure or unavailability for that child care or school situation. So let's talk about some of those words. Your own child, that's your biological child, an adopted child, a foster child, a stepchild, or maybe you're the legal ward, so legally you're the parent. Or I know many of you probably may not have heard this kind of legal term, but loco parentis is when a child for whom you are taking care of the day-to-day responsibilities and financially supporting that child. A lot of situations with grandparents fit under the loco parentis definition. So in that situation, it is your own child. And there's an asterisk next to the over 18 because if someone over 18 is incapable of self-care and their school or daycare is closed or unavailable due to COVID, then there are exceptions to those criteria. Okay, so let's talk about some of the issues, just like we did with the paid sick leave. We'll talk about some of the issues with the expanded leave. So the very first one is that the associate, if they are personally symptomatic, in other words, they have the symptoms themselves, and even if they've been confirmed, there are no expanded leave because we just talked about it. It's only for childcare of your own child, right? Not for you personally. However, they could take FMLA but remember that it would be unpaid, and please remind them of that. Okay, so if it's personal and I am the one who's sick and maybe I've been confirmed, or maybe I have the symptoms and have gone and sought out the doctor's orders and I'm in quarantine, etc., expanded leave does not apply to me. All I have is sick leave. Shelter in place, completely irrelevant for the expanded leave, right? Because we're only talking about the child care closure or unavailability. So shelter in place is irrelevant. The word telework, if by chance that remote option is there for your employee, it's really going to be hard for them to be able to justify why they have leave. Now, if they can make the case for a COVID reason, then please, as employers, err on the side of conservatism, because you don't want to get into a litigious battle with your employee about this that's going to cost you in the long run more time, valuable time that you're taking away from your clients and customers, as well as, of course, other resources, financial included. All right, so telework is very relevant. And then the last piece of job protection is completely irrelevant if there is no work and you've had a furlough or layoff. All right, so it's the same for both portions of the benefits, whether paid sick leave or expanded leave. If there is no work and you have shut down, there is really no leave available. So hopefully that makes common sense, even though some may want to think otherwise. A couple more key issues. If by chance child care provider is not licensed or compensated, it still is okay. Now, when it first came out, there were a lot of questions around this, and the DOL has really defined it very, very well. So the child care provider does not need to be licensed nor compensated. Just need to make sure that there is closure or unavailability due to COVID. Want to make sure that those criteria are the ones that we're using to define who is an appropriate child care provider. We talked about the intermittent schedule earlier, so it's the same thing. The employer approval must be there. And we talked about this whole idea of two parents taking expanded leave. No, I'm sorry, we talked about it for sick leave, and now we're talking about it for expanded leave. Both situations are the same, that it will be highly suspect to the DOL if by chance you are both taking expanded leave or paid sick leave, and especially if, for instance, you're newer parents and you only have one child at home. A couple more points. The FAQs contain a lot of language regarding the interplay between you and the employee to kind of top off their pay. Yes, you can actually do a very kind gesture, and if by chance they are taking the 2/3 but need the full pay, you can top off their pay. Just realize that you do not get the credits, the tax credits that are being made available to you as an employer. All right, so if it's out of your generosity, that's completely fine. However, just realize that you don't then get the credits. And we talked a little bit about documentation earlier, so we wanted to take a moment to recap this. We're not kidding, 4 years. Most of the documentation is probably what you do for leaves right now. You want to get the employee's name, the dates for their leaves, the qualifying reasons, make sure that it's about COVID, and make sure that it's related only to childcare, closure, and unavailability. And then some type of written statement the employee makes that they are unable to work because of that qualified leave or the reasons for the leave. It could be a simple email that they send to you, so it doesn't have to be documented, stamped, signed by a notary public or anything like that. And the record retention on this is 4 years. So before we open it up to Q&A, Tao, any other components on the expanded leave that you would add to what I just shared?
No, I think you covered it, Claudio.
All right. So let's review some of your questions. And so We're now because my grade, but there is someone.
Hey, Claudio, we may let Tao do the questions because your audio is degraded.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I see that we have a couple of questions here in our Q&A. The first one is, we have several locations and each location has roughly 1 to 8 employees, and our main office has about 40 employees, so altogether about 80 employees. And the question is, under the FFCRA, do they fall under the small business exemption? And you're not alone in asking that questions. We've had a few others that have asked that. And mainly what I'm pointing people to is, yes, you are going to want to rely on what the FMLA guidance is, because the DOL hasn't specifically addressed the location question, but they have addressed questions on, whether, jointly or commonly owned companies are count their employees separately, and their test is to, again, look at the FMLA and guidance and follow those criteria to see whether you would be treated, you would have your employees treated under one umbrella and counted, or whether there's jointly, or you meet the joint employer test or not. And then also, you want to take into consideration what I mentioned earlier, is whether you have employees that are shared amongst your different locations. So even if you were going to try to treat them as separate counts, you may need to now include that pool for your total. The next question is whether the cap on the $5,000 cap is that amount for all employees, whether they make more or less. So yes, that is the cap. So if they make more, that is the cap. And then if they make less, then you would only, include up to what they are eligible for in the calculation. And then the last question is, does this work against their accumulated sick leave? So what Claudia was mentioning earlier, what under the paid sick leave, they're allowed, this is in addition to any other type of leave that you as an employer can provide to them. And they're not required, you're not, as an employer, you're not allowed to require them to use your employer paid other PTO time in place of this. So this is in addition to, but the difference is under the extended family medical leave, you are able to allow them to have their paid leave run concurrent. And will you be sending out a copy of this presentation? Yes, we'll be distributing this out to all the attendees, as well as posting it onto our B&V webpage for you to reference back to. I hope I've answered all the questions. If there are any others, please just send us an email afterwards, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.